All right, guys, we are recording. Welcome. Thank you for bearing with us in all of that technological failings. A topic I really wanted to talk about today was the topic of sexuality, because I feel like it's a really important topic. I don't really feel like the church does a really good job of addressing. Basically, it's don't do it, and that's about it. Steven, can you sit over here so I can see you, please? Por favor. I'm just
Hi
gonna keep
guys.
asking till you move. It's just weird to have to turn around. Okay. I have a bunch of discussion questions first before we get into the meat of it. To just kind of promote discussion. So if you're muted, don't feel bad about jumping in and offering your thoughts because this is more of a talking thing. So my first question for everybody is simple question. Something that the church does a bad job of answering, though, is the question of whether or not sexuality in itself is good or bad. I kind of grew up, in a conservative church, and all I basically heard was sex is bad, don't do it. I just kind of want to know what you guys' thoughts are, what you grew up hearing, what do you think about it now, type thing. I'm not gonna be able to hear you from there.
I don't think it's good or bad. It just depends how you use it.
Okay, could you guys hear that? He said it's not good or bad, depends how you use it.
Yeah. I feel like I grew up thinking it's like the worst thing in the world that you can do. But now I'm starting to realize that God created it. But I agree with Stephen that it's I guess it's the context and the intentions behind it.
The what behind it?
Like the context and the intentions behind it too.
Okay.
I guess one thing I would say first is how do you define, what do you mean by sex?
How would you like to define it? I mean, because sexuality can be anything from holding hands to intercourse. Are you asking specifically sex itself or the whole broad spectrum of sexuality?
I would say, I guess I was just trying to figure out, okay, what context are you talking? Not necessarily what context, but overall, I would say yes, sex is a great thing. But I don't know. I think for me, a lot of it right now, I've been in a very exploratory phase,
What phase?
just exploratory.
Oh, exploratory. Okay.
So just trying to. Sorry, that was Google directing me. Just trying to figure out where I relate to all of that and that sort of thing. Sorry, that doesn't answer your question.
It's okay. You can share any of that, really. I mean, I feel like most of us grew up. I mean, I'm just assuming most of us grew up in a church where they had probably purity conferences, and they talked about why don't do it, it's bad. Tried to use scare tactics with pregnancy and STDs. And honestly, I grew up feeling like sex was the unpardonable sin, because they'd always do these horrible analogies and metaphors of they'd hold up a beautiful flower. Was this you telling me this, Shanice, about the beautiful flower, and they crumple it and they trample on it and be like, this is your sexuality.
Maybe not in that context. I think you shared that, but I had defined it as two pieces of paper.
Oh,
that
right.
Are, glued and
Yeah.
And
I don't know if you guys have heard different analogies people use for once you lose your virginity, that's it, you can't go back, and type of thing. And so you have this fear of oh my gosh, I'm gonna be forever. And matter what I do, like once it's gone forever. And I feel like that is a really negative portrayal because it also makes like that bigger than Jesus. You know, like is that beyond the blood of Jesus? No, it's not. And like no sin is impossible to be made new, but that's the kind of like the mentality I had growing up with it. So like I had this idea that it was bad. But we know that God made it. He invented it. It was his idea, right? So obviously it can't be in and of itself bad. Actually, there's this quote by C.S. Lewis. Have you guys read the Screw Tape Letters? Anybody read that book? Oh, it's so good. So it's one of my top favorite books. It's basically a book that's written in the perspective of a demon. So like it's kind of like it's kind of like a diary of a demon and like how he looks at humans' lives and like tries to get them to how he tries to tempt them and stuff. And so one of the I actually have a quote written down. I wanted to read it because it's really good. So this is one of the demons talking to another demon. He says, "Never forget that when we are dealing with any pleasure in its healthy and normal, satisfying form, we are in a sense on the enemy's territory, God's territory. He made pleasure. All our research so far has not enabled us to produce one. All we can do is encourage the humans to take the pleasures in which the enemy has produced at times or in ways or in degrees that he has forbidden." And I think that's really interesting because like pleasure is inherently good. You know, like God invented pleasure. Like he made food to taste good. You know, like food could have just been like what I feed my dogs. Like cardboard, you know, kibbles and bits. You know, like just to give us what we need to satisfy our nutritional needs. But he made it taste good and he gave us variety. He made things beautiful for us to like look at and enjoy looking at, right? So like pleasure in and of itself isn't a bad thing. But the devil takes all good pleasures and twists them. You know, he makes them. He can't produce pleasure because pleasure in itself is good. So like the devil can't produce a pleasure. So all he can do is take a pleasure and twist it and pervert it, and that's like what he can offer. And so like the quote is saying like all that we can do is get the humans to participate in these pleasures in degrees or at times or in ways that God has forbidden. And the manipulation here is that like Satan wants to think like those parameters are like keeping you from enjoying something that we want, right? Like, oh well, God said you can't do this, you know, in this way, so he's putting restrictions on you, right? Can you please sit here, please? Anyways, so like we look at food for example. You know, food is good, it tastes good, it nourishes our bodies, whatever. And there's the doorbell. But like there's limits on, you know, eating food. Like we don't just sit down and like eat food all day long because we'll get obese. You know, we get diabetes, we get clogged arteries. Like we know that limits on good things are good, right? But like when it comes to sex, the world was like, oh no, any limits on that is bad. Does that make sense? And so like inherently humans understand that like extremes in any case is usually a bad thing. But when it comes to sex, most people are like, you're restricting my fun or you're trying to take away my enjoyment or whatever. Anyways, do you guys have any thoughts about that? Hey, come join. Can you kind of like come this way so I'm not like turning my back when everybody gets uncomfortable? You can sit there. It's actually not super like in the camera. No. We were just talking about, I don't know if you were when you got off, but we were talking about like excess and extremes.
At the door.
So we were saying like with food, we know that like gluttony, you know, an excess of eating produces bad things like obesity and clogged arteries, diabetes, whatever. But like when it comes to sex, people are like, they frown upon any type of boundary. They're like, why should I limit myself? You know what I mean? So like it's a good thing, therefore there should be no limits, no boundaries. Does that make sense? Anyways, the next question is, why did God invent sex? Like, what's the purpose of it?
For unity.
Can you elaborate?
Well, initially, I guess it was to procreate. But that's, I believe sex is a kind of form that what it's been described to me as it's like that closeness with somebody that you experience is kind of the way, in a sense, of how he wants to be close to you.
You said in the beginning it was. I'm sorry. Could you repeat what you said in the beginning? Like, originally it was meant for procreation.
Yeah.
So my question would be then, like, you know how different animals reproduce in different ways. Like, some just naturally, like, what's it called?
Asexual reproduction.
Thank you. Like, but like, is it budding or no spores or what is it? So who's the people that know things?
That they can just like break off themselves.
Lay eggs?
What?
What are you talking about?
Like, you know, they just like amoebas. They just kind of separate and form.
I think that's budding.
Mitosis?
I think so.
What? You're the chemistry teacher. What is it?
No idea.
Anyways, my point is, like, a lot of animals don't require sex to reproduce, right? Or that their sex isn't really like pleasurable. Like, I think there's only a few animals that actually like have sex for pleasure, isn't like dolphins and chimpanzees or something. But most don't. You know, so like, what makes ours different? Like, why did God make ours that way?
There's supposed to be like an analogy where the closest between us and God that we're supposed to have.
Yeah, I think so. You know, we were made in God's image, you know, and God is a Trinity. God's not just one, he's three, right? So like, in order for love to be actual love, you have to have more than one person. You have to have at least three. Because if, let's say I'm in a relationship with Ben and it's just us two together, like, we can be selfish with each other and like cut out everyone else and it's just us two all the time. And so we're kind of selfishly absorbing your time, you're selfishly absorbing my time, and we don't have to share because it's just two. Does that make sense? As soon as you bring in a third, you have to start sharing. So now I have to allow you to spend time with the third person and like give up my rights to be with you. Does that make sense? So like in a Trinity, they have perfect love, if that makes sense, at least three. And so when the man and woman come together, you know, it's the two, but you create a third through reproduction, if that makes sense. And so like in the way, like, we exhibit God's image in the sense of like the two becoming one flesh and procreating. I think it's really beautiful. What else was I gonna say about that? Here's another question, and this one I'm probably gonna spend a little bit of time on. What are some lies that we believe about sex, that the world says about sex, that the church says about sex, that we, you know, anything? Like, what are some lies as a whole that we believe, or that not necessarily that you personally believe, but like people in general believe? I'm not trying to look at anybody in particular.
I think one is that like it's okay outside of marriage if you love the person. Like I hear that all the time, and I mean I've believed that all my life.
That's a good one, Gina. Yeah, it's definitely something that's said.
Follow-up question on that. Obviously, like, there wasn't an official marriage ceremony that happened back at the beginning in Garden of Eden. So,
What do you mean by official marriage ceremony? Because we don't know.
true.
Maybe not like we have today.
Yeah.
You know, obviously.
There's no documented official,
Yeah.
like, God just created man and woman and put them together. So, I'm not trying to discount what you're saying, Gina. I'm just like, okay, if the two people have like committed staying together for the rest of their lives and are planning to do that, what's to keep them from doing it?
I think she means like you don't intend to necessarily like be together forever, like you're in a relationship, like, oh well, we love each other, so it's okay. Is that kind of what you're saying, Gina? Like
Yeah.
eventually you
Yeah,
break up
like
and then you get into another relationship. I think there is a place to recognize like keeping like the laws of the land and like adhering to that, because the Bible talks a lot about like, you know, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and you know, giving honor to the politicians that he's put in place. But if for some reason there was no like official governmental like paper that says you're married, I mean, you could be married before God and be like, I commit to this person, and you live as if it were officially a governmental thing. Does that make sense? So like before God is more important than before man, but both are important if both are available. If that makes sense. Okay, so that's one thing. What else?
Well, I've heard that like being able to choose like when and how you have sex is like the ultimate freedom.
Can you elaborate on that?
I guess if I can, I don't know. Because you know how people are saying like my body, my choice, my life, my choice. So then people feel like the more choices they can make, I guess, the more free they are.
Okay.
okay.
So, yeah, okay, I see what you're saying, like the my body, my choice. What about that sex is a biological human need that you have to have?
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, we are created, you know, as sexual beings, but you won't die without sex.
Right. I feel like when I think about that, I think about like people with like different disabilities and medical conditions and things like that. So if you're saying that having sex is a necessity, but then there's people that aren't having sex, then are you calling them less than human, or that their experience is less than human?
Yeah. What about Jesus? Jesus never had sex.
Exactly.
Says who? No, really. I'm not being confrontational. I'm just like, you say we don't have the same connection that Jesus had, but like where does it say that in the Bible? It actually says the opposite in a lot of places, that the fullness of Christ dwells within us and that we have complete access to the Father the same that Jesus did. You know, if we don't believe that, well, that's kind of what's available. We can take it or we cannot. But I think we're going to get to the part about Jesus' life a little bit later, and in a later question. But I think what Nuvia is hitting on is kind of what I'm saying is that sex is part of human experience, but it's not like if you don't have it, it's not that you don't have a human experience or that you are somehow like what she was saying, less than or missing out or lacking in some way. Like there's people like, oh well, you need human connection. Like yeah, you do. You know, we have that with family and friends, and like we definitely need human connection, support, and all those things. You know, but lots of people don't get married. A lot of people are called to a life of celibacy and singleness. You know, even Jesus like modeled that you know, like that it's possible to live a fulfilling life without it. And that's not to say that it's bad. Like it's not that it was beneath Jesus's dignity to do that, or that it would be sinful if he were to get married. But I think that there's so much lies and there's so much like deception surrounding sexuality that it was a bold statement for him to come and be like, you don't need this, what you need is me. You know, like we've elevated sexuality so high, especially in this culture, to like where we feel like our lives aren't complete unless we have that. Does that make sense? And it's hard because like it's so ingrained in our culture and it's so ingrained in social media. It's like everywhere. It's like we've elevated romantic relationships to the standard of like this is the highest form of everything, you know. But we'll talk more about that. I didn't want to like kind of start off the bat with that one. But what other lies do you guys feel like the world teaches or tries to convince us of, that you've heard or whatever?
make ourselves feel good, regardless of who we're with or our relationship status. It's just
I mean, like sex sells, or like using it as an advertising tool, which again is preying upon the idea that like, oh, you must have this, like, yeah. Like commercials use the idea like you deserve it, like type of thing to like convince you to buy something. Yeah, I have a few that I wanted to say. That it's no big deal, that it's just like recreational. Which again, hookup culture, Tinder, people like, oh, it's no big deal, like, it's not that serious, but like the Bible's like, no, it really is. Like, you're combining souls with somebody, you're becoming one flesh, and like there's consequences, like it's not that God's just sitting up there and be like, don't have sex or else, like he's not just like arbitrarily like, I don't want you to do this, there's a reason. It's like,
he knows how good it is.
yeah, and I said this before, I think, but like, robbers and thieves don't break into empty houses. They go after the valuable things. Like if you're a counterfeiter, you don't counterfeit $1 bills. You're not going to go through all that time and effort to counterfeit a $1 bill. You're going to go after the $100 bills, right? That's what you're going to counterfeit. So like Satan's not going to be like, oh, well, sex isn't that valuable. Like, no, it really is. That's why he's made such a huge big deal out of it. Like, because there's something to it. There's something there, completely lost my train of thought. That's fine. It's been a long day. Yeah, and we see that with the recreational mentality. Like, have you guys seen the movie? What's it called? Shoot, is it Friends with Benefits? Is that the name of a movie?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, like that whole mentality of like, oh well, this is just something that people do and that you need, blah blah blah, and it's not a big deal. And it's really sad, and it's also where is it in the Bible that says like good will become evil and evil will become good? Like people that actually choose to wait or like don't partake in that are looked upon as weird and abnormal, like as if it's unhealthy for people to like restrict themselves in that way, like when I used to work as a nurse and people were always talking about like, I'm sure people always talk about like going to the bars and hooking up and stuff like that's all they talk about, and I'm like, I would never have anything to contribute to that conversation. And there's like, Grace, why aren't you dating anyone? Why aren't you doing this? Like, you're young, you only live once. I'm like, anyways. Another lie I feel like that we believe about it is that sexual relationships are somehow better than friendships. And I feel like Disney definitely didn't help me in that regard. I'm definitely a little bit more than obsessed with Disney. But like at a young age, we're taught to elevate romantic relationships above everything, and that, I know a lot of you know my story. I feel like that's definitely what set me up to like putting romantic relationships on a pedestal, where like I was willing to put everything on the line and like sacrifice even my morals and values to keep that relationship, rather than like what I actually knew was right, because I had elevated above God. Does that make sense? Like I elevated a romantic relationship above my relationship with Jesus. I was like, well, this is fulfilling, and the one with Jesus isn't, right? So, and that brings me to this next point, which I was talking to God this afternoon when I was preparing for this, and I was like, God, this is a really important topic, and I know this is like heavily loaded with a lot of feelings, a lot of like opinions, and a lot of baggage. There's a lot of baggage surrounding this topic, and I was like, how can I really express to like how big of a deal this is? And then like God gave me this question. He's like, ask them like, why does Satan target sexuality so much more than anything else? And I was like, okay. So before I give you like what he gave me, I want to ask you guys that, like, why do you think more than anything else Satan has made such a target of sexuality?
So powerful.
It's something so powerful. What do you guys think over in computer land?
I feel like a sexual like relationship, like in the marriage context, can like really symbolize like our relationship with God. And maybe like the enemy just doesn't want us to like know God like that, or I don't know how to explain it. It was in my head and it sounded good. But I don't know. I feel like we can know God better through that, and maybe He doesn't want us to experience that.
Okay, that's good. Well, that's obviously true. He definitely doesn't want us to experience that. What do you guys think? Like, if you were the devil, like, what reasons would you think, like, you would have for, like, you know what, I'm going to target sex specifically?
I think it's something that like everyone enjoys. A lot of other things are just like some people like them, some people don't. I mean, I'm sure there are people who dislike it, I'm sure, but it's like
I think we can't hear you again, Grace.
I can't hear
I
you
can't hear.
either.
Turns off.
What do you mean?
Eventually, like.
There you go.
Turns
We can
off.
hear you now.
Yeah, but the sound's coming through the speakers and the headphones, and so it just automatically turns off.
Oh.
It hasn't heard sound through the headphones.
Okay, well, just let me know if I go out, so then we can fix it again. Oh, the devil's trying me today. This has literally never happened in any other topic we've ever talked about, and I've done like 10 of these at least. That just tells me something. Okay. Any other thoughts? Like,
Oh, Julie wrote something in the message.
oh, what did Julie say? It's something Satan can never have. That's true too. I mean, angels can't have, you know, angels don't. That's interesting. I never thought of it that way.
Mm.
He's jealous. That's actually a really good point. That's true that angels don't do that. So I had never thought of this way before, but today, like I was thinking about, it's like, okay, God, what can I say? And like this thought just came to my mind, and it was that the idea of sexuality and just the whole broad spectrum of like sex, romantic relationships, all of that kind of like interwoven thing, like had the potential to break every single one of the 10 Commandments. I know there's one that says specifically, you shall not commit adultery. Like, obviously, there's one specifically for that, but like, it can break literally and violate every single commandment. And I'm going to go through and kind of like explain what I mean, and then ask you guys like what you think also. The first one, I'm in Exodus 20, if you want to like open up to it and look at it. It goes over the 10 Commandments. The first one is, you shall have no other gods before me. Anybody think of how that can relate to this? Yeah, a lot of people, myself included, have, again, like put romantic relationship sexuality on a pedestal, where like you literally will give your all to that. And like I've been in a lot of situations in a young age where I was like, okay, I'm not going to be okay if I don't have this romantic relationship, and like this person is giving me my value, this person's giving me my meaning in life, all the things that we're only supposed to get from God, and we'll never be satisfied unless it comes from him. And so literally right off the bat, first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. And God and sex and romantic relationships are definitely one of those that are very, very common for that to do that. And the second one is kind of similar. You shall not make for yourself a graven image or anything on heaven above or on earth below. You should not bow down to them or worship them. And this is kind of similar to the first one. But the first thing that comes to my mind when you think about images is what? When it comes to sex. Porn. Yeah?
Yeah.
And how many people like post, I mean, it's not the same as an idol or graven image, but like in essence it's the same thing, posting, bathing suit models all over their walls, putting like, what are those calendars? Thank you, swimsuit calendars. Like hanging those, like spending hours in front of the TV screen. It's become like an image. You're worshiping an image, right? And it's not even something realistic, because we know that like porn isn't realistic, right? It's staged, it's enhanced, whatever, what have you. Just in the same way that like the graven images, they weren't representative of real gods. Like they didn't exist, right? They're bowing down and worshiping something that's not even real. Does that make sense? And like as I'm like going through this and realizing this, like my mind is getting more and more blown, because I'm just like this is why like it's such a grip on like so many people. The third one. Does someone want to read the third one? You don't have to read all of it, just because it's kind of long.
Exodus 20.
Yeah. It's the third commandment. It's verse 7.
You must not misuse the name of the Lord your God. The Lord will not let you go unpunished if you misuse his name.
Okay, cool. So this one took me a minute, and I was like, okay. I was like, all right, God, like, what does this have to do with anything? Then I was like, what do we think it means to use the Lord's name in vain? Just first of all, because I feel like people don't really understand this, and I definitely just grew up believing it was just say don't say oh my God growing up. Like, but I'm pretty sure like God didn't make a commandment just for people to not say oh my God. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's probably more to it than that, if you feel me. What do you guys think it means, like to misuse the name of the Lord? Because that's what it says.
To not treat it with respect, I guess. I don't know.
Okay. What else? Let's kind of flesh it out. What about people that claim the title of Christian or call themselves a follower of God, but then literally act completely the opposite? Would that be a misuse of God's name? If you're claiming to be a miniature Christ or a Christian, that's what Christian means, and then you're just like not even close to acting like that, wouldn't that be a huge misuse and misrepresentation of him? Yeah?
Yeah, I could say that.
And so if you're claiming to be like God, someone who's so pure and so holy, but yet you're partaking in like something that's completely, like literally everything in the New Testament says avoid this. Sexual immorality is always like the first one. Like, and then later comes like drunkenness and like, whatever, drunkenness and slandering and greed and whatever. But like sexual morality is always the top of the list, right? To say like, Christ lives in me and I'm full of Christ and like I represent him, and then to live in a way that's completely impure, to live like the world, like that is a huge misuse of his name. And now this next one is interesting. So the next one is about the Sabbath. And this one took me a while. I was like, because like I didn't have this idea. I wasn't like planning on talking about the 10 Commandments. That was not even in my brain. But he led me here, and I was like, okay, so what does the Sabbath day have to do with anything? But the Sabbath day was the first celebration of God's creation and God's design. Yeah. So like Adam and Eve were created on the 6th day, and then on the 7th day was the celebration, the Sabbath, where he rested, and like basically they woke up to like the first date day with God. Like, Sabbath is a special time to come together and celebrate. Like he rested from what he did, and he called it good. Right? So if Sabbath is essentially a celebration of God's design and his creation and his plan, and like everything he called good, but yet we take his design, his design of sex and union, which he created for Adam and Eve, and yet we're like, I don't like your design. I'm going to do it this way because I like my design better. That's like spitting in his face, saying like, I don't even, what you call good isn't good. He was like, I'm going to do it my way. My design's better than yours. And like, I was like, because, I've done that in my life. I was like, well, God, it's not fair. Like, I'm wasting my youth. I'm not getting any younger type thing, So it's like people start taking things into their own hands and in essence say like their design is better than his, if that makes sense. And like, as I'm going through this, I'm just like getting more and more like realizing like why sexuality is so important. All right, this next one.
Hey, Grace.
Yes.
For that same one, when you first read it, it made me think of like putting your rest and your trust solely on like your partner. You know, like they're the one that is like, I need them by my side or else I can't have like peace or I can't have happiness. And like, you know, the Sabbath is not just like a day of the week. It's like a moment with God where he's your peace. So if you're finding like your comfort and your peace in someone else, that's not, you know, the perfect peace.
Yeah. It's interesting you said that because rest is like my word for 2020. I do like a word instead of New Year's resolutions just because it's too much to keep track of and one word's way easier. but you know, the Sabbath is about rest, right? And rest is something you do when you really trust someone. Like God's been telling me like I want you to rest in my goodness and just stop striving, stop worrying, just rest. Right? Because I do a lot of worrying. I'm a professional worrier. And so he's like, you can't trust me and worry at the same time, right? Like you either believe that I'm good and I've got it, or you don't, you know. And so, again, it's like we're missing the point of like Sabbath when we can't rest until like we find that person, you know, to be with, who's going to give us our meaning. You know, all those things. And not to say that like being in a marriage is bad, because it's not. God made it, right? But it crosses a line where it becomes, I need this to be okay versus, yeah, I would like that. You know, I would really like a chocolate fudge sundae right now, but I'm not going to be like miserable and let it steal my joy and become depressed if I don't have it. Does that make sense? There's a line. Like wanting something's not bad. Wanting something's fine, especially if it's a good thing. Like chocolate sundaes are freaking good, you know? But the moment it steals your peace and joy and your value, your worth, it's become too much.
Right.
And sex is one of the main things that people do that with, you know, in romantic relationships. The next one, are we good to move on? Does anybody have anything else? Good? Gina? Okay. The next one, Shanice, if you wanna, do you mind reading that one?
All right. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you.
Could y'all hear that?
No.
This one's the one about honor your father and mother. And I was like, okay, what does this got to do with anything? Do you guys have any thoughts before I give you my thoughts?
Yes.
Please.
So I just read, I think it was like Proverbs 13 through 16, somewhere around there. And it talks about, you know, a father's and mother's crown or like joy or something, or glory is their children. And so if you're like out and about just like not having it together, like that's not bringing like honor and peace and that blessing that children are supposed to be to parents.
Out and about.
Well,
Oot and a boot. Yeah, it makes me think of like, not so much in America, but like in other countries, honor is more of a big deal. And like, if just the concept, I'm not saying this is necessarily good, but just the concept, like typically like if like a daughter were to be found like impure, it would disgrace the father before like he was able to marry her off. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And that's a parallel for like, we don't belong to ourselves, we belong to God, our Father, right? And so like it brings dishonor to him in the same way it would bring dishonor to like a human father, if that makes sense. But also they're talking about family, and like the whole plan and design of family is surrounded by a healthy view and a healthy function of sex, because you know people out there, you know, out of wedlock having babies, it breaks down the whole family unit. You're dishonoring the design of family, the mother and the father role, the mother role, bringing a child into like an actual family versus like, you know, we got unwanted kids, we got dads that have left, you know, baby mamas and baby daddies and drama and all that stuff. And there's this quote, I guess, that I really like. It's like, if you wouldn't make what is it? If you wouldn't make her a wife, don't make her a mother. You guys heard that? I had to think about it for a second. If you wouldn't make her a wife, don't make her a mother. Yeah. Have you guys heard that?
Yeah.
And so like taking sex out of its proper role disrespects the entire family unit, right? It just brings dishonor to like the father, whether it be your human father or your heavenly father, because again, we belong to him. He is our dad. You know, like he wants to give us away, but like we can't do that if we just start giving ourselves away. You know, and that's true of men too. Like it's not just for girls. Like, any thoughts before we go on to the next one?
Yeah, I thought that one was gonna be a stretch, but then when you started saying stuff, I was like, huh, that actually makes sense.
I thought all of
Like,
these.
I was like, we're gonna stretch so much.
I thought all of these were going to be a stretch because this
Yeah.
wasn't my idea. I was
Yeah.
like, okay, God, maybe some of the 10 Commandments. He's like, no, all. I'm like, are you sure? Like, because I feel like, you know, they have one specifically for this. It's called You Shall Not Commit Adultery.
Yeah.
I don't see why the rest of them. He's like, no, all. I'm like, okay. Like, okay, jeez. All right, the next one. Who knows the next one? Does anybody have these memorized? I used to have the 10 Commandments memorized back when I was a good child. Anybody know what the next one is after honor your father and mother?
Says you must not murder.
Okay. You must not murder, you must not kill, whichever way you want to look at it. Any thoughts about that one?
I mean, David murdered when he like got in a relationship with Bathsheba.
That's good too. I thought.
Are you gonna say abortion?
No, I wasn't, but that's also a good point. Y'all, see, this is why I asked, because he mentioned David and Bathsheba, which I hadn't thought about, and how he had to kill, what was his face? Uriah, thanks. And then you said abortion, that's good too. What were you saying?
There's like a TV show called like Deadly Affairs or Love Kills.
Love kills.
Oh yeah, like
Investigation Discovery.
I don't know, but like a lot of like murders are like because of love triangles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That wasn't the route I was going to take, but those are all really good points too. And Nuvia, your point about abortion is definitely, again, because you take sex out of its context, you're disrespecting the family circle. You bring a child into the world that you don't want. You're like, oh shoot, this isn't how it's supposed to happen. This is out of the design. Well, let's get rid of it, right? That's something I actually hadn't thought about, which is ironic. But what I was thinking of is, who's ever had their heart broken in here? Anyone? Okay. Well, like, it's so much worse when you throw sex into it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you literally feel like you died. Like, I hope some of you haven't ever had to experience that.
I don't know, but I'm sure.
I'm just gonna trust you on that.
Well, like, you know, you can have a crush on someone and you get your heart broken, but like when you've been physical with them in any capacity, it makes it so much worse because like you've given a part of yourself to them, and they've just taken it and been like stomp on it and break it. Like, right? Like, I mean, in a sense, those like church metaphors that they do, like of the paper ripping apart together when you glue them together and the stomping on the rose, has an element of truth to it, right? Because like it does damage and kill a part of you, right? But it's not. Right, but it's not beyond the blood of Jesus, which is what I feel like isn't preached. They just end there, and it's like, well, you're gonna be like this flower that's been trampled on if you have sex outside of marriage, and then there's no hope. And it's like, well, what about the people in the audience that have already done this? Like, what are you leaving them with, right? We make it, we elevate it above the power of God to restore, which is wrong, completely wrong. But yeah, like when you have sex outside of its context, it kills a part of you, especially if you do it over and over and over again. Like you keep destroying that, and it makes it so much harder to heal in men, and it literally is killing you. It's killing that part of your soul to be able to connect with someone in a meaningful way. Because who knows that like people that just continually have sex over and over again, just casually, it loses a significance. It loses a meaning. It becomes nothing, right? Where sex is supposed to be such a powerful bond, but like when you do it over and over again, it's like, oh, well, it's no big deal. Like you're making it, you're stripping its power away. Like, right? It's supposed to, like, people think that Christians have like this negative sense of sex when in reality, like, we have such an exalted view of sex because like we understand how powerful and meaningful it is. That's why we treat it with such honor and respect, right?
Mm.
Versus like, oh, it's just this casual thing like playing tennis that we do and it's no big deal, you know? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really good.
Oh, thank you. Nuvia's all like into it right now, doing the side lean. Yeah. Okay, we can just kind of skip the next one. You shall not commit adultery because
Oh, really? How does that?
that's what we're.
I don't get it.
Shut up, Steven. Yeah.
That connects with something in the Sermon on the Mount.
Okay, go.
Let me see here. If I can find it.
I think that's Matthew 5.
It's the whole sermon goes through 5 through 7.
Well, it starts in 5, so.
Yeah. I'm just trying to find which particular place it, like, chapter.
Oh, I could actually just look up
I was
while
just
I'm just sitting here
looking
watching you.
to have
Which part are you looking for specifically?
Matthew 5:28.
How do I know if this is gonna go off again?
Press this button. Pause.
Can y'all still hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, go ahead, Ben.
Okay, it's 27:28 of Matthew chapter 5. You have heard that it was said to those of old, "You shall not commit adultery." But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust after her, and I assume that also goes for women to men and all that as well,
Yes.
has already committed adultery, and here I paraphrase, with that person in their heart.
Yeah, and we're actually gonna. I have that verse actually written down. Sorry.
I do a good job of taking it away from you.
No, it's fine. I could have told you that, so you didn't have to like look it up. We're gonna get to that here in a second. When we start talking about purity, like what it is and all of that. But yeah, for sure. The next commandment after that one is you shall not steal. Thoughts? How does thou shalt not steal relate to sexuality?
Maybe, I don't know, I thought of like, you remember how Jesus, when they asked him about should we give money to Caesar, and he said give to God what is God's and give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Maybe like what he's saying is that like we're God's, like we're not our own, and when we give away a part of ourselves like to somebody else in the wrong context, like we're stealing from God.
Yeah, that is also true. I had that wasn't the thought that I had, so that's interesting. Any other thoughts?
My Bible has a note from Matthew 5:28-29 talks about how that can apply to someone who in the future could be someone else's spouse. So even if they, for whatever reason, are fine with it, I'm still taking from that person, that future spouse, what would have been theirs if we were like getting into pornography or whatever.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I was going to say is to steal something is to take something that's not yours, right? And so, like, let's say I'm dating whoever and we have sex together. That person doesn't belong to me, right? I'm just taking from them something that I want, and I'm taking from whoever his future wife is going to be someday. You know, that's something that belongs to her, but I'm taking it for myself, right? So that's stealing. And we're also, like Gina said, stealing from God too, because we are not our own. We've been purchased with a price, right? Like the father gives his daughter away at her wedding, right? Like she doesn't walk herself down the aisle and give herself away. They ask like, who gives this woman? And the father says, I do, right? That's a beautiful like metaphor of like what Jesus is doing. You know. Hey Ben, can you reach behind you and turn the fan off? I'm getting cold. It's just right there. You don't have to actually get up. Okay, cool. The next one, we're almost done. You shall not give false testimony or false witness against thy neighbor. There's a lot of lying that goes involved in sex, let me just say. No offense to these men, but especially from men. Like, I love you, girl. Sorry. Women can do, well, I mean, women don't usually say that to get that, because guys are usually just like, okay. But I'm not hating on men, sorry. Steven and Ben, yeah.
Not hanging on that. I can see like
What do you guys think? What do you mean?
what if you don't have to lie?
That's true. That's why I'm asking if there are any other thoughts. You don't necessarily have to lie to get sex. I mean, there is a lot of lying that goes involved in it typically. Not always, but a lot of people use manipulation. The thing that came to my mind was the act of having sex with someone you're not married to is in itself a lie. Because what does sex symbolize? Union, covenant, commitment, right? You are basically promising something that is not yours to promise. You're
You don't intend on.
Yeah. Yeah, but like even if you intend to be like, oh, I love this person, be with them forever, but if you haven't like stood before God and like made that covenant, like you're doing it, you're promising something that's not yours to promise yet. Does that make sense? So and it's in and of itself a lie, because it's like sex is a blood covenant. So having it outside of covenant is already breaking the covenant. If that makes sense. Yeah. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think it's
y'all.
Yeah, it's like it's a promise that you don't intend to keep.
Yeah, or you
because I can tell you like, yeah, exactly. Because I can tell you like my brother had a baby with his girlfriend, and she was just like devastated when the relationship didn't work out. And even though they hadn't like talked about marriage, like obviously when you do talk about having a child, because they did talk about it, like I think she was expecting something else, you know?
And rightfully
So it's like you're saying like,
He was being false witness.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not like, this is like more serious than a lack of communication or misunderstanding or anything like that, or expectations, or like literally if you're going to have a child with someone, you're saying I want to be connected to you for the rest of my life in a positive way, which is again like you're saying a promise that you can't keep or you don't intend to keep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really serious. Like it's like what you said, it goes beyond just a miscommunication. Like the act in itself is a covenant, right? Like so to do it out of covenant is already breaking covenant, if that makes sense. All right, and the last one, the last commandment, who knows it? Don't covet what someone else has. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. So, how many people be lusting after, the body that somebody else has to start off with, right? And it's interesting because I recently kind of had like a revelation moment with this whole coveting thing. Like coveting was kind of like one of those commandments that I never really thought about. It's just like, oh, that's for materialistic people, like I'm not materialistic. I don't like want the latest iPhone, or what do people want? Big TVs or cars or whatever. So like I'm not coveting, right? Like it was just kind of one of those commandments that I just kind of like brushed past and was like, oh yeah, whatever. But then like God really like revealed to me within the past like week or so, like actually coveting is rooted in the sense of lack, right? It doesn't have to necessarily be about material objects or possessions, but it can. But it's rooted in this sense of lack, that you lack something that you need, that if you don't have this, you're not going to be okay. And that can be anything. And for me, it definitely has been like, making a person or romantic relationship the object of like coveting. if that makes sense. Like, you see people in relationships and you're just like, ugh, take your love elsewhere, like all over Facebook, you see people getting married in relationships. You're like, ugh, get a room, or It's true though. Like, how many people hate on people for that? But and that's I lost my train of thought. But yeah, so like, coveting is huge when it comes to sexuality, because number one, you're looking at someone's body being like, man, I wish I could have that. Or especially if like someone is in a relationship with somebody else and you want them, then you're causing them to cheat, which goes back to committing adultery. So like, coveting is the root of a lot of things, right? The coveting might lead you to steal, to kill somebody, whatever. Like, coveting is actually one of the, like, they say pride was the original sin, but where did the pride come from? It came from coveting. Like, Lucifer wanted to be God. He saw what God had and wanted it, right? Like, coveting and pride, we don't think are that big of a deal. Like, oh, well, it's not as bad as murder. But where does murder come from? Like, it doesn't just one day you just murder someone for no reason. You murder them for a reason, like, because you want something they have, right? And so like, coveting is terrible, and like, we don't think of it as such a bad thing because you can't really see it. Like, it's not a visible sin. Like, if I kill you, you obviously saw that happen. Or if I steal something, you saw that happen. Like, you can't like keep that inside and no one notice, right? But like, coveting has such deep roots, like, ensnares you, like, entangles you in this web of like, oh, and it's awful. Like, this sense of lack that you have this sense of like, it's not fair that I don't have this. Does that make sense?
Lost you. We don't hear you.
Testing.
Good.
Dude, the devil is trying me today. Like, he does not want me to talk about this. Like, I'm gonna write him another angry letter. Dude, I wrote him an angry letter. Huh? Look, I'm telling you, like, the devil does not want me to talk about this topic because, like, man, I don't know what I was saying. You were saying something, Gina, about coveting.
Oh no, I didn't say anything.
Okay. Yeah. All right, so that was a lot, I know. I just thought that was really intense. Like, God was showing me, like, there's a reason why Satan is targeting sexuality, because it has roots in every single commandment. And the fact that we said that, like, you don't counterfeit $1 bills, right? You go for the big money. All right, the next question I have, which we kind of brought up a little bit earlier, was, what does Jesus's life have to say about sexuality? And it can be anything from his life, anything that he said or did or didn't do.
He approves of it, but he says he don't need it. Like, he wasn't married or anything, but like, his first miracle was at a wedding, so he obviously approves.
That's a good point, Steven. Did you hear what he said?
What is it?
Huh?
What'd he say?
He said that it's sexuality and all that stuff is stuff that God approves of, but you don't need it. And he said his first miracle was at a wedding. And I was like, true? I didn't even think of that.
Think of that?
No, I didn't. Like, that's the beauty of like doing this, is because I'll think of something that somebody else won't think of, and then you'll think of something that I won't think of, and then we say it and we all think of it together. It's great. Yeah, so that's actually a really good point, Steven. The thing that stuck out to me so much about Jesus's life was that no one can say he didn't live a fulfilled life. Like, he was full of joy and peace, and like, when you looked into his eyes, like, people knew there was something different about him, right? But he never, huh? Oh, hey,
What?
Skylar's joining.
Welcome.
Just in time. Hey, are you doing the being quiet thing because your roommate is sleeping, or are you going to be able to talk?
I can talk right now, but I don't know if I'll be able to the whole time.
Cool. We are discussing, what did Jesus's life have to say about sexuality?
Awesome.
Do you have any quick thoughts while you're able to talk about that?
The first thing that comes to mind is there's a passage in Hebrews where it says that he was tempted on all points and yet without sin.
Hadn't thought of that either.
And so I think it's sometimes in Christianity we overemphasize the divinity of Jesus at the expense of his humanity. And we say things like, well, that was Jesus, right? And yet the Bible clearly tells us that he was tempted, right? And the Bible also tells us in first or second Corinthians, that anytime we're tempted, God always provides a way of escape. So we can't really use the like, well, that was Jesus and I'm just little old me as an excuse, when Jesus has actually paved the way and blazed a trail to show us what is available, what's possible in terms of purity.
That's really good. I hadn't thought about that verse about like he was tempted in all ways. I mean, he was a man, right? Like it wasn't like Jesus was born into the world without functioning genitalia. Like, sorry to be crude, but like honestly, like I feel like sometimes we think of Jesus as like this sexless saint, you know, like what Skylar said, that we uphold or elevate the divinity of Jesus at the expense of his humanity. Like it wouldn't be fair for him to come without all the same temptations as that we have, because it'd be like, oh well, he had it easy, you know, like of course he didn't sin because, you know, he's not tempted the same way I am, or like, you know, he didn't have sexual urges like I do, you know. It's like, no, he did. Like, you know, it wouldn't be a fair test. He wouldn't have been able to redeem mankind and succeed in the ways that we failed if he didn't have go through the same thing, you know. Yeah, and I like what Skylar said too about paving the way and showing us what's available. And you know, Jesus multiple times said that like he only is able to do what the Father is telling him. His power only comes from the Father, right? I feel like I kind of had this idea growing up that like Jesus had an unfair advantage, and in the sense that he did is that he knew what a full relationship with God was like. But when he came as a man, he gave up like everything. Like he was like, I'm going to become a man. So that would be like me saying I'm going to become an ant, like a little, not like a aunt and uncle, but like an insect. I'm going to become an aunt. No, like you maintain your same personality, your same character, and so you're still the same you, but just with a different body, right? And so like as an little crawly ant, like I can't do the same things that I'm able to do now. Like as a human, I can, I don't know, use a computer and talk on the phone and like lift the sofa, but like as a little crawly ant, I can't do that, right? Like I've given up that ability to do that, right? But it's still me, like fully Grace and fully ant at the same time, because I've still who I am. I'm still me. I still have the same mind, still have the same character, right? And so like that, the mind of me. That's why you're fully me and fully. It's an imperfect analogy, because we have characters and God has a character. We have personality. God has a personality. Right, we were created in His image. Ants were not created in my image. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So like, it's not a perfect analogy, but like to demonstrate like the concept, like to be able to be fully God and fully man. That's the only thing that makes sense. Like it would be again an unfair advantage for him to just come as fully God and be like, oh well, I'm not gonna sin because I'm God. And it's like, well, that's not fair. Like you can't redeem mankind as God. You have to redeem man as man, right? He's the second Adam. He took our place, you know. And so that's something I really had to like think through. I was like, you know, it changes the whole game if you believe that Jesus came as a man versus came as God, because God can do things that are impossible for humans, but Jesus came as a human, right? And so like if he was able to do those things, his whole message was like, you have the same access to the Father that I have. And we don't see it, we don't manifest it because we don't really believe it. Just because we don't see it in our personal experience doesn't mean it's not available. And like the more we believe it's available and reach for it, the more we see it. And I've seen that in my own life. I used to struggle with sexual temptation like terribly. Like it was something that like I fought all the time, like constantly striving against, constantly like beating myself up over, like trying literally everything to stop, but like was not able to, right? Like trying literally everything. Like but I what was stopping me is I didn't believe freedom was possible. I believed that like, well, we're just sinners, we're just human, this is part of the human experience, and it's just something I'm going to struggle with today I die. But then like the revelation that Jesus came as a man to show us like how we can actually expect to live, like that started changing the game. And we see in Jesus's life, like what Stephen said, like he approves of weddings, he approves of marriage. His first miracle was at a wedding. Like what are the things he said to Mary Magdalene? Like he never looked down on those who had not lived a life of purity. He said to Mary Magdalene, go and sin no more. Right? Would he say that to her if it wasn't possible? Right. I don't condemn you. Or who is it that condemns you? I don't condemn you. Go and sin no more. Would he say that to her if it wasn't possible for her to do that? Like he wouldn't tell us like something impossible and command us to do that if it wasn't possible. And that also completely demolishes the idea that like having sex outside of marriage is the unpardonable sin. I literally honestly grew up believing that, like, because it had been drilled like into my head so much that like once you have sex you can't go back, and like you're just dirty forever, and you might as well just keep doing it since you've already done it, and it doesn't matter at that point because you can only give it once, and like after that ship has sailed, and like even if you're like a good girl the rest of your life, it's that ship, like it's gone, right? So but you're also a guy, and there's a little bit different standard for women than there is for men in this society, which is also backwards from the kingdom, because like purity is something for everybody, not just for women. But that's another lie, I guess we could have mentioned, that sexual purity is just for women and not important for men. We could have gone over a bunch of lies, but we would be here for like 5 hours. Yeah. Any thoughts or questions or comments about any of, like, we kind of just said a lot. I kind of went on a mini monologue, sorry.
So we know that Mary, Jesus' mother, became pregnant because of the Holy Spirit, but not a lot of people believe that. So I think Jesus' life also tells us that you can come back from like a perceived sexual immoral background, because I think she was like respected, and that family was respected, even though maybe Jesus wasn't. He was like called kind of like an illegitimate child. Yeah. But I think we believe that Jesus was the Son of God, and he did a lot of good things. Even people just think of him as a prophet or a good like leader or whatever. So I think just even starting or having come from a family that had that perception put on them, you can still do something with your life, like great.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Like Jesus grew up with a reputation of coming from impurity. Like he was called the bastard child or the illegitimate son. But yet here he is, obviously the pure and holy one. And I think that's just what gives me a lot of hope, actually. That's really interesting. Let's see. I was going to look up a verse here. I can't remember which one it was. That's okay. Here's another question for you guys. Since we're on this topic, what is purity and how would you define it? Because, your perspective on the gospel and life and religion and lots of different things are going to affect that answer.
Well, from a scientific chemistry point of view, when we talk about pure chemicals, it's just one thing. There's not a mixture. So maybe in the context of like spiritual purity is where like all your influence is coming from God, or what is motivating you is God, rather than a mix of you and God, or like your friends and God. So maybe something along that line.
Okay. Anybody else have thoughts about what purity is?
Yes. That definition makes logical sense. But the church has done a fantastic job.
Fantastic or actually fantastic?
Yeah. In my opinion, yeah. In more of the negative context.
Fantastic.
Yeah. For those of us perfectionists who try to do everything right, make God and everyone else happy with us. The church has done a fantastic job of teaching us the theory and saying, now go do the theory, and not actually teaching us how to have the heart aspect that will make that intrinsic instead of just trying to make everyone else happy. If that makes sense.
And that comes back to what we talked about last week. Like the mark of a true Christian is the new creation, right? Like there's nothing wrong with all these like Christian behaviors like tithing and going to church or whatever, but if it's coming out of a place of striving, like trying to earn your place or prove your worth or trying to earn your salvation, like that's not coming from the right place, because you're striving for something and ignoring the fact that like the finished work of the cross that already purchased it for you. So if you're a new creation, you don't have to strive for victory. You're working from victory, if that makes sense. Like knowing that you are is different than I'm trying to become. And one has a place of rest and one is a place of striving and endless like toil and like feeling inadequate and all of that. Does that make sense? So yeah, the other thing I could have mentioned in like the lies that we believe about sexuality is like there's a line, or there's like too far, this point is too far, right? Like, but everything before that is fine. And like everyone's answer is going to be different for that. It's like, oh well, kissing is fine, you know, making out is fine, little handsy stuff is fine, but like we draw the line here, right? But so like you can get as close to the fire as long as you don't cross this line, right? And then you're still pure as long as you don't cross this line, right? And I feel like no, like you're missing the whole heart of the matter. Like purity isn't like a get as close to the fire as you possibly can without getting burned, because again that comes back to works and you're striving to like earn the title of purity rather than like you already have a heart of purity. Were you going to say something?
Here's one thing I learned from Mr. Raymond back in Bible school.
Mr.
He
Who?
would be like, back in academy days, he would teach us how crossing a line meant, okay, here's the line, but standing right behind the line, that doesn't mean anything. The fact that I'm putting my finger right in front of Stephen's face and saying, I'm not touching your face, what's the purpose? You know?
You're still being annoying.
You know, just the fact that you're right behind that line doesn't make any, you know, difference as you not crossing that line. You thinking that you're standing behind that line still kind of indicates that you're crossing a line in some kind of context.
It's kind of like if your heart is like, let me just get as close to the line as I can because you really want to, then you're not pure, right? It's just like the people. It's like in the Sermon on the Mount, he's talking about like don't do your good deeds in front of men to get the praise of others. So it's like the motivation behind what you're doing, right? And we were talking about how, like with what is sin, it's not actions in and of themselves, but it's like the reason behind them, right? So like if I'm just like, let me get with this guy as far as I can and like up to his boundary, I don't have a heart of purity. I have a heart of like selfish, I'm going to take from him, right? And that's, even though technically like by definition it's like you're pure because you haven't had sex, like your heart isn't pure because you're trying to get as much as you can with it still be okay. Does that make sense? The other concept, this is more towards Nuvia's statement. Where did she go? Her video's gone. It's okay. How you're talking about like pure substances. I've read this quote somewhere that was like, I hand you a glass of sparkling water, right? And you're super thirsty and you're like, yeah, awesome. And I tell you like, oh, don't worry, it's 99% fresh water. It's only 1% poop particles. Like, you're like, you don't really want to drink it, do you? Like, knowing there's like poop particles in the water, like, even though it's 99% pure, right? And that's like the same concept, like, there is no such thing as like partial purity, if that makes sense. Like, you either are or you aren't. There's no like, oh, well, I think I'm approximately 65.3% pure. Like, or like, I've only done this and I haven't done that, so I'm purer than they are. Like this comparison thing. Does that make sense? Like, it's kind of like you're not kind of saved. You're either like saved or you're not saved. There's no like, oh, well, I'm 45% saved. And so like this goes back to the new creation thing. Like, if you believe you're a new creation, you believe you've been made pure, then you've been made pure. Like, what you've done before, what you've done in the past, like, is not in you anymore. Then you don't need to like have that hanging over your head or feel like you need to purge yourself of that, because like the blood of Jesus made you clean. It made you pure completely. So anyways, thoughts about that? You guys still hear me? Okay, please let me know the minute that you can't, because I ain't trying to let the devil get a foothold in this Bible study. So any other thoughts about purity?
I just keep thinking of like, remember when the Pharisees, like, they kept like Jesus, I forgot exactly the words or where it is, but when Jesus talked about their how on the outside they look pure, but on the
Yes.
inside they're
Whitewashed tombs.
Yeah, like their minds are full of like lust and stuff like that. And I feel like that's the difference between like abstaining from it and walking in purity. Like, abstaining is like you're more concerned about not doing it, and then walking in purity, it's more like that you're pure, and you want what God wants, and it's not like, I don't know, it's like your will aligns with God's. I don't know.
Yeah. Does someone want to look up a verse?
I have my phone on me. Oh wait, where'd it go?
Does someone want to look up Romans 12? Romans 12 verses 1. Hey Shanice, if you want to go use my room, you can. Romans 12:1.
Romans.
Anybody got it?
It's in French. Hold on.
Did you say it's in French?
Yeah. I guess
Hey, you can read it in French and then I'll read it in English.
I was doing that all day, and I just realized like how to fix it. Okay. You want me to read it, or somebody is reading it?
Oh, yeah. Read it.
Therefore I urge you, brethren. Oh, I'm in NASB. Therefore I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living sacrifice. A living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service to worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect.
Yeah, I actually hadn't seen this verse in this way, but actually Skylar pointed it out to me today, actually. I don't know if he's able to talk at this moment. I'm going to take that as a no. Okay. And it's interesting because like he sent me this verse and said, purity is worship. Just like that short sentence, and then sent me this verse, and I was like, what? And then I read it again, and I was like, okay. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. And I thought about that, and I was like, I didn't even really know like what to make of it, because like it was like a new thought entering into my brain, and like I'm still processing it. Like I know there's something, like I know there's like meat in there, but like I haven't fully digested it. Like the concept that like purity is worship. What do you guys think? Like, you have any preliminary thoughts about it? It's okay if it's not like a fully fleshed out thought, because I don't even have a fully fleshed out thought about it yet.
Is it like related to like the verse?
Can you repeat the question, please?
There's not really a question. It's like, what are your preliminary thoughts about that?
Is this like related to the verse that says our bodies are the temple of God, and so we should like keep our bodies like, I don't know, healthy and
That's a good point. Can you guys hear him? Can you speak up or scoot closer?
it's because the microphone's like right in your face and not in mine.
Mhm.
I think it's kind of related to the verse that says, you know, our bodies are like God's temple or whatever, and we should keep it pure and stuff like that.
Our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's true. Like, I'm kind of like just talking out loud as I think about it. It's like if my body is the temple, right? Because God's Spirit lives in there, and you're letting unholy things enter into the temple, like that'd be disrespectful. Like, how many of you had parents that like yelled at you like, no running in the sanctuary, or like, get your dirty feet off the pew, or like, you know, whatever, like to respect God's house, right? So I guess that's, and I don't know again if Skylar can talk because I know he's getting ready for work. But like the concept of there's a worship component of purity, and it's just really interesting. I had never really thought about it like that, and it kind of adds to like the beauty and the mystery of it all. What do you guys think?
Yeah, like submit yourself to God, like in every way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's a verse that says like to submit your ways, so like your decisions, but this verse is saying that you submit your bodies to God. So like in every way, like you're supposed to be under him.
I think if we look at the very next verse also, if we look at the very next verse, like after that, we're talking about like purity is worship. Then it goes straight into don't conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of our minds. So we see that like transformation happens when we change the way that we think, right? And that's kind of like what I've been saying all along. Like what we believe is what we will manifest in our lives. So like I believed that, well, okay, Jesus was able to do all these things because he was God, you know. So obviously like I'm not held to that same standard because he was Jesus, right? Come on, like I'm not God. Obviously, like woe is me, poor little me. But like that's not the message that Jesus gives at all. Like he gives a full authority to his disciples. He says you are co-heirs with Christ. Like he says you are seated in heavenly places. He talks about unity and oneness with the Father. Like literally everything that he has, he's given to us. And like when we don't really believe that, or we don't accept it, of course we're not going to like experience it, you know. And so like this concept of purity, like instead of like this concept like, oh, I have to strive to be pure, right? That's like a lot of pressure and a lot of like effort and like, you know, sweat and like willpower. Whereas like you're already from a place of purity. Like God has already washed me clean. I don't have to strive to be pure. I just am pure. That's a whole new way of thinking, right? That's a renewing of your mind, and that's where we'll see transformation happens when we change what we believe, right? And that's what repentance is. Repentance is a consistent and maintained change of thinking, right? You're like, hey, that's, you know, I realize I don't want to do that. This path leads to this. It's a consistent decision to change a course of the way that you think. It's not just a feeling like, oh, I felt bad. You know, like that's not repentance. Like you know, people that say sorry over and over and over and over again, but they don't never change their behavior. Why are you laughing?
It's a change in mindset.
Your cat is taking great delight in mine.
Yes.
Careful, she does scratch and bite.
Let's see. And then Ben already mentioned this verse. but we can mention it again. Matthew 5:28. Just the one that talks about like if you look lustfully at a person, like that you've committed adultery with them, right? Like that brings a whole new spin on like what purity really is, because if we think it's just actions, like, oh well, I've never had sex with somebody, or I've never even held somebody's hand, but you're thinking all sorts of thoughts, or like entertaining fantasies. It's the same thing. Like it's still the same heart, right? Just because you haven't had the opportunity to act on it doesn't mean that you wouldn't, or that you don't want to. What was Steven? Were you gonna say?
Stephen was gonna say, so how I was talking about that verse that talks about how we're the temple.
Yes.
I just looked it up, and it's actually in a section calling or saying avoiding sexual sin. And if you read verse 1 Corinthians 6 verses 18 through 20, it says, "Run from sexual sin. No other sin so clearly affects the body as this one does. For sexual immorality is a sin against your own body. Don't you realize that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who lives in you and was given to you by God? You do not belong to yourself, for God bought you with a high price, so you must honor God with your body." I didn't realize like that was like specifically talking about sexual sin.
I didn't either. Well, there you go. You learned something. Mic drop.
Yeah. Awesome, Stephen. That was literally what I was just about to say. Yeah, it's amazing. And that revelation of union with God, notice how he starts out saying, like, if you are united with a prostitute, you become one flesh, right?
Yeah.
And but then he goes on to swap it around and be like, look, don't you guys understand that you're one with God? Like, so what you do with your body affects your relationship with God, affects how you connect with God and interact with him. So basically he's saying, like, look, let the revelation and the intensity and the power of God's connection to you from within be the thing that motivates and compels and inspires you to walk in purity. It's not he's not speaking from a place of like, stop messing up. You're a bunch of mess ups. He's saying, like,
stop doing the bad thing.
Right. He's saying, I mean, there is a command aspect of it in the terms of flee from sexual immorality, but it's more of like, hey guys, like, understand who you are, understand what you have, and that like you're one with God, and God's love for you and his union with you is meant to be the thing that keeps the inner fire burning in your desire for purity. It's not just about you and what you feel and, quote, doing the right thing. It's actually about loving God. And that's why worship is part of it, because worship is all about being an expression of love. So purity is a choice to love God through your actions and to turn your heart towards him.
It's like, oh, what did you say, Skylar? Like, it's not a choice of whether to indulge in sexual sin or to not indulge in sexual sin, but it's a choice of who you're going to worship.
That's exactly what it is.
So it's like, are you going to worship the devil, and his lies and his stance on sexuality, or are we going to worship God and his design of sexuality?
Yeah, and there's actually a place in Revelation, I'd have to find it. It's in one of the letters to the churches. I want to say maybe the one at Laodicea, but I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up. But he's describing the basically allowing sexual immorality and a few other things as the, quote, deep things of Satan. So, like, sexual immorality is not just like a sin. It's not just like no big deal, but it is like outright demonic. Like it is an affront to the design, the character, the beauty, the purity of God. And so when we choose to give into it, we're honoring Satan. Like there's no way around that. It's not just like I shouldn't do that. It's like I'm actually bowing to the enemy of God.
It's in essence saying his design of sexuality is better,
Yes.
which comes back to what I was saying about the 10 Commandments and keeping the one about the Sabbath, celebrating his design.
Yes.
This is deep, guys. Woo. Yeah. Shoot. So this brings me to the next question. Is okay, so given all of this, is purity possible? A lot of people think that it's not, or that it's going to be a struggle, your whole life, or that it's unrealistic to expect, you to be pure in this society, in this world. But again, we manifest what we believe, right? Let's look at Colossians 3:5. I'm just going to read it because I'm already open to it. Colossians 3:5 says, "Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature, sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, greed, blah, 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 blah." Notice what does he say to do to them? Put to death, right? And how do they get put to death? Do we have to die daily and strive to keep them in check every day? I'm making that up. I'm saying we don't do that. We don't die daily. This isn't a struggle that we have to keep killing over and over again. It's part of the flesh, and the flesh was put to death when? Right, the flesh was put to death when Jesus died on the cross. He conquered sin and death. We became a new creation. The flesh has been cut off. We talk about circumcision. That was the whole point of circumcision, was supposed to be a metaphor of it's been removed, right? The flesh is cut off of you. It's gone, right? So that's how it was put to death, right? Through the transformation, you're now new. That's no longer part of you. It doesn't say try really, really hard to resist your earthly nature, sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say do your best to manage. It doesn't say use all of your willpower against, right? But that's what we infer it to mean.
Yeah.
It says put to death. And the only thing that was capable of putting it to death was Jesus on the cross, who conquered sin and death, who shed his blood, who made it possible for us to kill the old man. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. Straight from the Bible. Go ahead.
Well, it says it in verse 9, if you keep going, it's going on with a list of sins. Don't lie to each other, for you have stripped off your old sinful nature and its wicked deeds. Put on your new nature and be renewed as you learn to know your Creator and become like Him.
Here you go.
I need to drop the mic again.
Yeah, drop the mic. Actually, no, it might turn off completely. I don't want to drop it. Yeah, cool. All right, next question. And this is kind of the crux of what I've been getting at. And this question.
Hey, Grace?
Also, yeah.
I got to go in a minute. Can I share a quick point?
Please.
So this is a concept that applies to this and to basically everything about being a Christian. When we see something in the Bible that seems beyond what we've experienced in our lives, whether that's the miraculous or purity or sharing the gospel with others boldly or whatever, there's a very, very easy road to take that most people take, which is to start making excuses based on their experience and to actually devalue the Bible, right? We elevate what we've been through and say that that's how it is, or that's what's possible, or that's what's real. And we push the Bible to the side and, well, that's for somebody else, or, well, I'm getting there, I'll get there in 50 or 60 years. We have to understand that, no, if God says it's possible, if he says, be holy as I am holy, if he says flee sexual immorality, if he says that he's made us holy and blameless, that's now. That's right now. And we have to steward our hearts to the point that we are willing to hold both my experience and the word of God up to the light and consciously choose to elevate the word of God and say, I am going to honor this. I'm going to value this. I'm going to believe this instead of my yesterday.
That beautifully segues into the question that actually you told me I should ask. How does sexuality change when we're born again?
When we're born again? Because we choose to die to the flesh and we choose to put on Christ.
Yeah. Not
And
just that, but our whole perspective of sexuality changes. Right? Like, the world looks at sexuality like completely self-focused, right? It's about me and my pleasure, what I can get, you know?
Right.
But, like, a transformed view of sexuality sees it's a complete, like, perspective shift. I wish I could pull up a text message, but my phone's being used for Facebook Live. Skylar had sent me something really, really good about, like, how it changes from, you know, I need this. This is something that I lack, something that I need. It's about me, and it changes to, like, no, I am already completely fulfilled in Christ. I lack nothing, and purity isn't something we strive for. It's the place that we begin, right? And that right there was, like, the victory moment for me, was realizing that, like, purity wasn't something I had to constantly strive for, because that was, like, the narrative of my life. Striving to feel clean, you know, through my actions, and, like, resisting, and, like, willpower, and obviously your willpower gives out eventually, because we were never meant to put things to death by our willpower. We're meant to put things to death through our faith in what Jesus did on the cross, right? You're saved by grace through faith. Without faith, you can't. So, you know, something else might stand out to somebody else, but that's what really, like, did it for me, was the concept of, like, you already are pure, you know, and it's a gift. So it's like you can just rest in the knowledge of, like, I am pure. I don't have to really, like, work to become this, you know? And then it's so much easier to be pure when you already know that you are, if that makes sense. I bring up this example every time, I feel like, but, like, if a girl believes that she's dirty and that she's a whore and that she's, like, unvaluable, not valuable, grammar, if that's what she believes about herself, that's how she's going to act, right? And that's how she's going to allow people to treat her in return, right? But if she believes that she's valuable, that she respects herself and knows what she deserves, that's how she's going to act, and she's not going to, like, accept treatment from other people. Like, what you believe about yourself manifests in how you act. And it's true. Like, if you believe that you're going to fail at something, you either aren't going to try, or you're not going to try very much because you already think that you're going to fail. But if you really believe you're going to succeed, even if you don't succeed the first time, you'll try again because you believe that, like, you can do it, right? And I know that's kind of cheesy, you know, like one of those inspirational quotes with, like, a beautiful sunny background and, like, fancy lettering, but anyways, it's true. Let's see, where was I? Can someone look up a verse? Someone want to volunteer as tribute? Luke 11:34. Luke 11:34. Okay, where is it? Am I not seeing? Here it is. Luke 11:34 through 35. Nope, all the way through 36. I lied. 34 through 36. You want to read it?
Your eye is the lamp of your body. When your eye or your conscience is sound and fulfilling its office, your whole body is full of light. But when it is not sound and is not fulfilling its office, your body is full of darkness. Be careful, therefore, that the light that is in you is not darkness. If then your entire body is illuminated, having no part dark, it will be wholly bright with light, as when a lamp with its bright rays gives you light.
Interesting. What version is that?
Amplified.
Amplified. Okay, I was wondering why there's a lot of extra words in there. Okay. I have the NIV. Before I go off on that, what do you guys think about that? It's kind of one of those verses that's kind of like, what is he talking about? But read it again.
Can you read it? Can you read it in your version?
Yeah. So mine says, your eye is the lamp of your body. When your eyes are healthy, or a little subscript says, another translation could be, when your eye is full of light, your whole body is also full of light. But when your eyes are unhealthy, your body is also full of darkness. See to it then that the light within you is not darkness. Therefore, if your whole body is full of light and no part of it is dark, it will be just as full of light as when a lamp shines its light on you. Have any thoughts or questions about it?
Trying to relate it.
It reminds me of the verse that says, like, whatever is pure, whatever is noble, think on these things.
Yeah.
So just kind of like fill our minds in our hearts with good things.
Yeah. So what stuck out to me was your eye, I mean, obviously, is how you see. How you see the world, what you have your focus on, right? So if I'm looking at something, I'm focusing on that. That's, this is the manner in which I see the world, my perspective. If that is full of darkness, or it's the lamp of the body, if my eyes are full of light, my whole body is also full of light. So like what I focus on has a big impact on like what goes inside, if that makes sense. So if I'm constantly focusing on like my faults, and I'm looking at, oh, I did this, and I'm like super sin conscious, like always like, oh, I did this, and like, oh man, like I shouldn't have done that, and like, man, like constantly focusing on that, like that's what your focus is on sin, right? And so that's what you're going to be manifesting, because that's what you're focusing on. Instead, if I'm looking at Jesus, looking at the light, right, and you're focusing on the solution instead of the problem, you're looking at the light is within you, if that makes sense. Let me keep reading. See to it then that the light within you is not darkness. And so many people are looking at the problem, or looking at something wrong. Their perspective and how they see is wrong. Like people's mindsets, how they understand the world or how they see things can be wrong. And so what they're really looking at is darkness instead of the light. And so they're saying, like, if what you're looking at is light, you're going to have light inside you. If you're looking at darkness is going to be inside of you. So see to it then that the light within you is not darkness. Basically saying, like, make sure that the truth or what you're seeing is like actually light and not darkness. I know I'm like repeating the same words over and over again, but the last sentence here, if your whole body is full of light and no part of it dark, it will be just as full of light as when a lamp shines its light on you. And so how this relates to this is, like, again, with belief, in how transformation and being born again affects purity and sexuality. If what we're looking at is like, I need this, like it's normal for me to, constantly like have these sexual urges. It's, it's expected and normal for me to just gratify my sexual desires. Then that darkness is going to be like what's inside and what we manifest. Does that make sense? But if I'm looking at the light, the truth of like, you are already pure, like you are already completely fulfilled in Christ and you lack nothing, and like sex is a gift, but it's not more important than the giver, right? Then I'm looking at the light, I become light inside. Does that make sense? Like, and also this can be related to like what we choose to put our focus on, like what we choose to look at. Like, I mean, they say that the eyes are the windows of the soul, like, and why porn is so harmful It's like the eyes are the lamp of the body. Like what we put into our eye, into our mind, like is going to take root, you know? People say, oh, porn isn't bad, it's not hurting anyone. But like you're planting like those lies inside, and it can't not have an effect, you know? I don't know if that made sense. That probably didn't make sense at all, but like it makes sense to did it make sense? Because I feel like I kept repeating like the same thing over and over again.
Well, it makes sense when you said like your eyes are like your perspective, right? So
Mhm.
that if you're thinking the wrong things, right? If your perspective is wrong, your whole body like is gonna be off because your actions gonna be off, everything's gonna be off because you're starting off from the wrong place. Whereas if your perspective is the truth, then everything else that follows will be good because you're basing your actions and your thoughts on the truth.
I'm just gonna have Steven explain it next time. That's way better. Ugh, sorry guys, it's been a long work day. My brain is fried.
Perks of being out of a job is a fresh mind.
Yeah, and this ties back to Romans 12 too. Like we are transformed by with the renewing of our mind. Like we're not gonna have light within us if we're not focusing on the light, right? We got to change the way we see. We got to change what we focus on. And Romans 12:1 and Romans 12:2 literally talks about purity is worship and change the way that you think, and that's how you see transformation. Like those two verses right there, I feel like is the summary of this entire topic. All right, just got a few more questions left. Let's see. We kind of already talked about this. One of my questions was gonna be, so why does sexuality matter? But Skylar kind of talked about this when we talked about like it's really just a choosing of who you're gonna worship, right? It's not just an arbitrary like, oh, am I gonna have sex with them or not? Am I gonna like sin or not? It's literally a conscious decision of like whose way is best, who am I gonna believe, who am I gonna put my trust in? Am I gonna trust my sexuality to God who designed it, or am I gonna entrust it to Satan? And he says this is what you need, this twisted form of pleasure, right? And purity is worship. So if we're pure, we're worshiping God, and through impurity, we're worshiping Satan. And ourselves, essentially, because the opposite of love is self-focused. And sex outside of the proper context is always self-focused. There's no way for you to say that it's not. Like, it is always self-focused. Like, even if you love the person, whatever, like, it is always self-focused if you do it before it's time. It's always because you can't wait or you just really want to or whatever. Like, there's no way to make it not selfish. And that's literally what Satan stands for, is selfishness and self-focus, and God's all about others and serving, right? All right, so the next question, let me see. And this is just kind of something that I don't really have like an answer for. It's kind of an individual thing. So what role does sexuality play in our lives?
Does it or should it?
Whichever.
Well, it should be like a example of how intimate we should be with God, just like that allegory or whatever. It also brings us closer to our spouse.
One thing that Skylar said to me was that like sexual feelings can be really strong, but like nothing is stronger than Jesus, right? And nothing is stronger than the new creation. He also said like when you're tempted, God will always provide a way out. And this one phrase that he said is like, when we really put our faith in Jesus and we really believe the truth, hormones will always bow at the throne of God. Like, right? Like hormones aren't more powerful than Jesus, right? Like they're strong, right? But like nothing's stronger, right? When we have our mind focused on them, we get distracted by them. We take our eyes off of the light and we're looking at the darkness, right? And it's easy to get distracted, especially when like this world is like literally like someone was saying that sex sells. Was that you? Or was that Shanice? She was saying that sex sells, like they use it as an advertising tool. So, and I never forgot that, like, because it's true, like, I saw a huge breakthrough in like sexuality for me, like when I stopped fighting it and constantly trying to use my willpower, but then just like rested in the fact that like, no, I already am pure and God's already won this battle. Like I'm fighting from victory instead of fighting for victory. You know, that was like a huge relief for me.
I think it's fairly easy to forget that the sins that we see ourselves doing, whether it's theft or sexual or whatever else, those, one of the professors I took a religion class from said that all of those are what he likes to call little less sins. They're merely just symptoms of a bigger issue. So for me, like if I'm tempted to go look at porn or whatever else, it's helpful to pause and say, what is missing right now in my life?
That sense of lack.
Yeah, what am I lacking? And then pausing to look at that can let me then redirect to what will actually fill.
Right, and being like, do I actually lack, or is that a lie from the devil to make me think that I do lack in order to go satisfy it somewhere else that won't actually fulfill me, right? Because when we believe we lack, then we start getting spiraling and all these things. But like, if we already believe we're fulfilled and that the fullness of Christ lives in you, you lack nothing. Like Jesus said, you lack nothing, right? If we really believe that, and it's like, okay, like Jesus showed us what's available, like I'm gonna take that, I'm gonna believe him, versus like, oh well, that was just God, so I actually skipped a verse that I was gonna look at. I'm gonna just look at it really quick. 1 Corinthians 6. Let me see where I want to start. It's the whole sexual immorality topic. Like it has a little heading.
Yeah, that's where the temple verse is.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, let me see where I want to start. Okay, I'm gonna start in 13 and go to well, I'll just read until I feel like stopping. 1 Corinthians 6:13 says, you say food for the stomach and the stomach for food, and God will destroy them both. The body, however, is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. By his power, God raised the Lord from the dead, and he will raise us also. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ himself? Shall I then take the members of Christ and unite them with a prostitute? Never. Do you not know that he who unites himself with a prostitute is one with her in body? For it is said, the two will become one flesh. But whoever is united with the Lord is one with him in spirit. And that comes back to, Jesus lives in you. You lack nothing because you are one with the Lord in spirit. Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who's in you, who you've received from God? You are not your own. You're bought with a price. Therefore, honor God with your body. That's a really powerful, section. And this might be a metaphor that you haven't heard of. I think it'll appeal to Steven because it has to do with cars. So, yeah. So, it says here that our bodies were not made for immorality, right? Specifically, where does it say that? However, it is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord. Okay, so basically he's saying, sexual immorality goes against what you were designed for. Goes against, your plan, your design, right? It's you can use a phone as a paperweight if you want to, right? But that's not what it was made for, right? With the car analogy that I think of, it's you're trying to put you're trying to put something in the car that it wasn't made to have. You're trying to put water or soda or sugar in the gas tank instead of gasoline, right? God's this isn't how the car is designed, right? It's not going to work. You're going to damage the car because this is how it's made, right? It's not a moral thing. It's just, this is the design. This is what it was created for, right? And so when we go out of the design, it's self-destructive because it's acting outside of purpose, if that makes sense. So like it's not so much like God just like being like you better not do that, but he's like there will be consequences that will happen naturally. Like if you decide to put a whole thing of like Pepsi Cola in your gas tank, it's not going to work out for you. You're functioning outside of design. Were you going to say something about cars?
No, I was just thinking of another analogy because like think of like your wall outlet, right? It was designed for like you to plug in your laptop or whatever, and that's good, and that's how it works. But if you put something else in there, like a fork or your finger, it's gonna hurt you because that's not what it was designed for. But if you use it for what it was designed for, then it's good.
And like, you know, parents always tell their kids not to stick their finger in the outlet, and they don't understand, and they just get mad. And it's kind of like how we are. We don't understand God's rules all the time, and so we think they're arbitrary.
You don't
or like
realize how powerful it is.
Right, like there's a reason why he says don't put your finger in an electrical outlet. Like, you know, it's not to take away your fun. It's to like protect you from getting burned. That works in both scenarios. Yeah, and so like when it says here like those who commit sexual sin are sinning against their own bodies, like it's literally like you're harming yourself. Just like with the car, like you put something that's not gasoline in the gas tank, you're hurting the car. Like you're sinning against your own self, right? And so again, that comes back to like, are we going to believe Satan's design? Like this is the way that sexuality should be, you know? And he says do all this crazy nonsense, or are we going to believe like God's design? He's the one that made it, right? So that comes down like who are you going to worship? Whose design are you going to be like that's the best design? Like, you know. Anyways, almost forgot that verse. Is there any other thoughts that anybody has? Questions? Kind of gone through all the things I had for today. Nubia, are you still there?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I just can't wait until I don't have this body anymore. Because like, especially being in quarantine, it's like, oh, make sure you exercise and make sure you're eating healthy and make sure your mental health. And I'm just like, I'm tired of like feeling like I have to obey the body. But that's what they tell you to do, right? You're hungry, eat, you're tired, go rest. Like that's what they're telling you, like listen to your body. And like it's not a bad thing, but you literally just read the literal words that said the body is not for sexual immorality. So I think like we have to be careful when we're listening to these messages, because it could be like subliminally like affecting you, right? Listen to your body and like maintain the body or whatever. So it just goes to show you again just how far a good thing can be taken off of being a good thing. You know, you started this whole conversation with saying that God made things to taste good and there's beauty in the world, and you're like, why was that even, you know, made? And again, it's for us to enjoy, and God wants us to have a beautiful life and to enjoy it. But yeah, twisting something like sex is just, it can, and it does affect all areas of your life, just like you pointed out with the 10 Commandments. Like it's just so bad. Like it can just go so bad in so many ways, you know, like human trafficking and pedophiles. And it's just like it can go literally crazy when it was just meant to be something so beautiful. But like you're saying, like there's so much controversy over it now, and it's just crazy. We can't hear you, your mic.
Steven's pushing my buttons. You can hear me now? Okay. Like I said, if sex was just a recreational thing, it wouldn't have such traumatic consequences. You know, like you said, broken families, abortion, putting kids up for adoption, unwanted, sex trafficking, pedophilia, incest. God, the list goes on, right? Like, and then you bring in the whole like gay marriage debate. You know, like all of this comes, or like even what is it called? not monogamy, but where you have polygamy. There you go. Like all these stem from sexuality, like all these vast issues, right? It's not just like playing tennis. It's not just it's not a normal appetite, right? Sex is an appetite, but it's not a normal appetite. And I think that it tries to make that point really well here in this verse in 1 Corinthians 6, verse 13. It says the food is for the stomach and the stomach for food, right? Food is made for the stomach, and we satisfy our hunger by eating. But the cravings of the body, however, like for sexual things, are not to be fed with sexual morality. Those two appetites are different, right? Like that is not what's going to satisfy it. It's like your body is craving nutrients, and you just eat a little Debbie's all the time. It's not going to work out well for you. The other thing, I have this written down in my Bible in the sidelines. That's margins. Ben, I don't know what I would do without you. This whole time you've been helping me. On the margins, I wrote about we're talking about like our bodies are temples, and this is really interesting. Like science people will appreciate this. Okay, our bodies are temples, correct? And our bodies are made of 46 chromosomes. I got that right, right? We've got 46. Huh? I'm pretty sure it's 46. You want to Google it while I'm talking? If it's not 46, this ruins my entire thing. But anyways, we have 46 chromosomes, I think. And okay, good. I've been confirmed by Google. All right, and if we look at John 2:20, but we don't have to turn to, it says that it took 46 years to build the temple. And I'm just like, what? Like our body, like a literal, like our body's fundamental building blocks are like other chromosomes, like what make you you. We have 46 of them, and it took 46 years to build the temple. And I'm just like, ugh, mind blown. That's so cool. I like things like that, so I just wanted to throw that out there in case anybody else thought that was cool.
What was that Bible reference again?
John 2:20. I think it's the Pharisees yelling at Jesus, saying like, "Oh, how could you tear down the temple and rebuild it in 3 days? It took 46 years to build it, or something like that." But I just thought it was really cool. More evidence that like we are the temple, and like God's Spirit really does dwell in us, and there is no separation between us anymore because the veil has been torn. We are now one. It literally says here, "But whoever is united with the Lord is one with Him in spirit." And what's more one than the two becoming one flesh through sex? Right? Like it's just so deep. Like when you delve into it, it's so deep. Anyways, I'm gonna stop recording because I want to show you guys a video. And last time I tried to like record the video and upload it to YouTube, I got in trouble with the community guidelines, and they flagged my video and deleted it because it's showing copyrighted material on your channel. Like I can't video a video and upload it. So anyways, I'm going to stop recording, and then I'm going to try and show you a really cool video. Okay, cool.